Good morning and welcome to the Dan Beasley Show. This show is about modern contemporary stories that are in the news, that are breaking, and some that have not been published yet on the major airways and in the major newspapers. We want to give you a fair and balanced view of the world events as they occur. And my name is Dan Beasley, and I'm coming to you from Hartsville, South Carolina on 7/12/2013. Time now is 11:46, originating from Hartsville, South Carolina. In the news today, we're moving straight forward to where northern Colorado wants to secede from Colorado. We've already seen secession before in the past, and we saw what the results were. I'm in a state that led the secession effort way back in the 1800s. And of course, there was a lot of issues at play at that time as well. A lot of social issues, a lot of upheaval in the economic situation of the nation. And therefore, it set the stage for one of the bloodiest battles or the bloodiest wars that ever was fought by Americans. Of all the other wars combined, the Civil War took more lives than any other lives that were taken in all the other wars combined. We lost 50,000 people in Vietnam. Of course, we lose 55,000 people a year approximately in car accidents. Um, there's talk about gun control in this country and all that, but yet the numbers do not even come close to the 55,000 mark that the car accidents cause, but yet we're willing to live with that risk, but we're not seemingly willing to live with the risk of protecting the country and protecting the freedoms that we have. And that was written into the Constitution, where it was the right of the populace to bear arms. And that is how we obtained our freedom from England, and that is how we kept our freedom until now, when they're all of a sudden in this date and time. Why would the tick of the clock and the turning of the page of the calendar isn't necessary to remove the guns from the hands of the people? Only the politicians can answer that. And my take on it is the formation of the one world government through the auspices of the United Nations that is pushing for this to happen. So therefore, we've got people that are trying systematically to dismantle our Constitution and trying to bring the country to an end. And this latest story with Northern Colorado wanting to secede from Colorado probably um, probably weaves itself into that same story. It says, "Will North Colorado become America's 51st state?" That is what some residents of the Centennial State are pushing for. Representatives from 8 northern counties convened Monday. The CBS Denver report says to begin mapping the boundaries of a new state that they say will represent the interests of rural Colorado. The secession movement stems from a growing urban-rural divide, with state lawmakers in Denver passing sweeping gun control legislation and calling for renewable energy and less oil and gas production, a big part of northern Colorado's economy. So northern Colorado has all these resources, and yet it's being dictated to by the urban politicians. And of course, where they, whatever they dictate and whatever they pass into law, rule Colorado, northern and northwestern Colorado has to follow suit. And they are finding that their voices are not being heard in the government. And what was this country founded on? Taxation without representation. Uh, it all started with a flashpoint point of being taxed for tea. Tea was being taxed at an exorbitant rate at that time, and it finally just pushed the magic button that caused the shot to be fired around the world that led to our freedom from Mother England. So anyway, we have had our freedom, and it was based on the fact that we were rebelling against an autocratic state and a state that did not listen to our needs, and therefore they were taxing us and milking the cow, so to speak, and shooting it for the beef. And we have to look at the situation as it occurs in our today's time, in our contemporary times. We are being taxed on top of taxed. I've heard once that a loaf of bread is taxed 111 times before it's finally uh, consumed by the consumer. And that goes back with the seed and the fertilizer and the fuel and everything else that goes into the mix to bring that harvest in and to bring that harvest to the mills to be turned into flour and then sent to the bakers to bake the bread, to distribute it, to sell it in the retail market, and thus forth. And that's not including all the other ingredients that go into it. So, 111 times of taxation, all summed up together, and a loaf of bread now is running over $2.50 to $3 a loaf. And back in revolutionary times, when bread hit $2 a loaf, they were protesting in the streets. Right now, the docile, silent majority are still trying to make do with the economic straits that they've been placed under, and yet we still don't hear hardly a whimper out of them. So therefore, they're going to eventually see what's taking place. They will eventually wake up from the state of slumber that they are in. Right now, it says that their voices are being ignored in the legislative process this year. Does that sound familiar? And our way of life is under attack. This is not a stunt. This is a very serious, deliberative discussion that's going on. Sean Conway said. He told CBS Denver News that there is a real feeling that lots of folks who come from urban areas don't appreciate the contributions that many Coloradans contribute. Officials from Weld, Morgan, Logan, Sedgwick, Phillip, Washington, Yuma, and Kit Carson counties were involved in the discussions, Conway said, adding that 2 counties in Nebraska are interested in joining the new state. We need to figure out a way to re-enfranchise the people who feel politically disenfranchised right now or ignored. Conway and his coalition are hoping to put the question of secession to vote in November through a ballot referendum. Well, good luck with that. The Soviet Union was able to break up peacefully without any bloodshed or very much bloodshed. But the U.S. Obviously took a different course back in the 1800s, and they tried to do it under the guise of slavery and all of that. But it was really about states' rights, and it was about the federal government wanting to take over control of the United States. And it was about states' rights, and states have always wanted the right. And there are articles in the Constitution that allow for secession. However, those were ignored whenever South Carolina and the rest of the country that was siding with them tried to secede from the Union at that time. Had they seceded, we may have a different image of the world today. It may be totally better. However, I don't agree with slavery. I think slavery should never have occurred, and I think other countries should bear the brunt for what happened, and also the northern states should bear the brunt for what they did, because they originally participated in the slave trade, and yet they passed them down to the South, and then the South had to depend on them to help with their economy, and then the North came back later and double-crossed the South and tried to ransack the South, and they actually, just raped the country and took its wealth back up north. So here we have a country that's had a split personality for the last 150 years, and yet they still try to use slavery as the main cause for the Civil War, which it was not. It was states' rights versus federal rights. And there were Federalists back then, and there were people back then that believed strongly in independence. South Carolina participated. It was one of the first original colonies, 13 colonies, and it participated very valiantly in the Revolutionary War. If you don't believe me, watch the movie The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson. That will show you what South Carolina was at that time and what it still believed in 100 years later. Independence, just like Texas. Texas joined the country later with the understanding that it could withdraw at any time it wished, and that was written into the agreement. So anyway, moving on to the next news segment, Popocatépetl. Let me see if I can say this correctly. Popocatépetl volcano covers Mexico City in volcanic ash. The volcano spewed a 2-mile high cloud of ash over Mexico City over several days of eruption. That's half the distance that a jetliner normally flies. And it's covered cars in Mexico City, and thick accumulations coated crops, homes, sidewalks, and in towns closer to the volcano. It spat out a cloud of ash and vapor 2 miles high over several days of eruption, and Mexico City residents awoke Saturday to find a fine layer of volcanic dust on their cars. Volcanic ash is actually glass. It's particles of glass, microscopic or almost microscopic shards of glass that, if inhaled, it could cause you to have severe respiratory illnesses. And also, it can cause problems with crops by coating them and preventing them from getting the necessary sunlight that they need. And also, it can clog up filters belonging to cars and air conditioning and things of that nature. So it is a very dangerous situation, and also for aircraft that can ingest the fine ash into their engines and can cause air crashes. So anyway, they said that Claudia Dominguez, spokeswoman for the Mexican City Civil Defense Office, said that the very fine ash had probably been floating around the city from eruptions in previous days and had been brought to earth by late rainfall Friday. And she said that no new ash had been reported Saturday despite continuous eruptions of vapor and ash into the air from the volcano. And they said that the city residents were surprised by the talcum-like ash. Inhabitants of towns near the volcano had to deal with much thicker accumulations that have covered their crops, homes, and sidewalks. So anyway, that was reminiscent of Mount St. Helens when it erupted in Portland, or near Portland, way back in the 80s. It exploded and blew the entire mountainside off and killed people as far away as 5 miles away. And anyway, we're moving on to our next news segment. This is coming to you from Christian Science Monitor. And this New York building has collapsed and has injured 12 people following an explosion. Explosion inside the Chinatown building on Thursday led to a fire and a partial collapse, injuring a dozen people, including firefighters. 3 of those injured were hospitalized in serious conditions. Injuries to the other people, including the 4 firefighters, were less severe and included burns. Fire officials said several pesticide canisters, or so-called bug bombs, were found in the first floor rear apartment and may have exploded, but the cause of the blaze had not been determined. Investigators were also looking into a possible gas leak. The next news item is diet soda may not be good for you and may not help you lose weight. It says diet soda, it turns out, may not be the panacea for weight loss that we all thought, and maybe many of us hoped it was. In fact, a Purdue University study has found that diet sodas may be linked to a new number of health problems, from obesity to diabetes to heart disease, just like their sugary counterparts. Susie Swithers, a professor of psychological sciences and behavioral neuroscientist, reviewed a number of recent studies looking at whether drinking diet soft drinks over the long term increases the likelihood a person will overeat, gain weight, develop other health problems.